What's happening forum? So we've reached a very interesting point in this little series of reviews. A game that many people see as a downturn for the franchise, a game that many people see as an upturn for the franchise, a game that was in many ways the Fallout franchise's ascension into the mainstream. Fallout 3 was my first Fallout game and really my first RPG. I was 12 at the time, and I remember walking out of Vault 101 into the light for the first time as if it was yesterday. This was the game that I remember, besides Halo 3, taught me that video games can be so much more than just a mindless toy to pass the time with. This is not my favourite Fallout game, but I have a spot for it in my heart that's softer than a cosplayer's thighs. I may have skipped over a few wet farts on the way from Fallout 2 to Fallout 3, but long story short, Todd Howard fucking owns you now. The original Fallout 3 was canned due to Interplay running out of beans, and the Fallout rights were sold to Bethesda Softworks of Elder Scrolls fame, and as such the series from this point onwards takes a very different approach to its presentation and its content. Here in the distant future of 2008, we have found a way to ascend into the glorious realms of the third dimension thanks to Bethesda's flawless Gamebryo engine, which allowed them to craft a version of the Fallout wasteland that we can experience entirely in the first person. Finally, we can see all of the shit brown and murky green up close and personal. Fallout 3 takes place in the year of our Lord 2277, in a part of the country that is as far away from the interesting politics and locations of the previous two games as it can be. And this is both to its detriment and its benefit. You play as the lone wanderer from Vault 101, where no one ever enters and no one ever leaves, which actually couldn't be further from the truth. And your father, played by Liam Neeson,
black bastard, would come out of a pub and have a go at me about something, you know, so that I could kill him.
Leaves the vault when your character is around the age of 19, and you decide to cope with your newfound abandonment issues by murdering a couple of cops and taking off to go look for him. After you exit the vault and lose your hearing in the process, you are subject to the part of the game that is impossible to dislike. This vault exiting sequence where you see the horizon as your eyes adjust is one of the game's crowning achievements, and there are very few games that manage to introduce you to a world this effectively, with landmarks framed against the horizon and your first port of call in your quest visible just off to the right. You're presented with both the idea that you can go anywhere you want, and also given guidance should you accept it. This is one of several thousand things that Bethesda would try to replicate later with Fallout 4. A few steps down the road, and after a bit of financially motivated murder, you find yourself at the gate to Megaton, the game's first major town and a monument to both Bethesda's strengths and their weaknesses. Megaton is a characterful location filled with some interesting characters, but it doesn't make a lick of sense, even beyond the fact that it was built around an undetonated nuclear bomb. We've all seen the video. What do they eat? Personally, I enjoy Fallout 3's world, but this question about what people eat brings up some fundamental problems with how Bethesda has approached designing this game. Do they all survive by eating the single cow in the middle of town? There's a surprising lack of infrastructure or even human life at a more basic level on show here, considering that it's been 200 years since the total obliteration of America. The West Coast at this time has recovered to a point at which life is at least somewhat livable, and yet in the capital wasteland people are still sucking the moisture from cat shit in order to sustain themselves. Whilst the NCR is currently fighting the first battle of Hoover Dam, the Lone Wanderer is dragging themselves through the dirt over here. Megaton is a good place to go shopping and pick up a few side quests, and is the first stop in your main quest. You need to find out where your dad went, and the information can be garnered relatively easily and will point you towards Galaxy News Radio. And oh boy, what a journey is this going to be. It's hard to imagine that the combat in this series could have improved so little in its transition from isometric turn-based to real-time first-person, yet it somehow managed to just stay shit. But just a different flavour this time. Fallout 3's real-time combat is so incredibly flawed that it might as well be a teenager's skin. Not to be piling negatives on top of a game that I love, but the weapons have no punch, the sound effects are weak, the guns have no recoil, enemies react as if they've been hit by a Nerf dart when shot, enemies are either too weak or too spongy, and the enemy AI is completely brain dead. In order to counterbalance this monolithic downside to the combat, Bethesda introduced the VATS system, or the Vault-Tec Assisted Targeting System. This allowed you to stop time and queue up a few shots to be executed in a pseudo-turn-based fashion, in an attempt to both alleviate the game's issues but also offer a bit of classic Fallout flair. There's not much to be said about VATS that hasn't already been said. It's slow and clunky and it breaks up the combat too much, but I'll be damned if it ain't cooler than Keanu Reeves covered in chocolate sauce. Since this game tries to carry across the series' iconic ultra-violence into the third dimension, you get to see some Burnout Crash mode slow-mo gore explosions every time you press that button, which will do a lot because the guns are not very fun to be shooting normally. On your journey to the Galaxy News HQ, you will travel through some of DC's many metro tunnels, which is a very frequent occurrence in this game and, when experienced sparingly, induces a feeling of bum-tingling suspense, claustrophobia and mild horror. I know that looking back on these tunnels now, they feel like an inconvenience that you have to get lost in trying to find your way to where you need to go, but they're a perfect example of the hopeless and horrific feeling that Bethesda was aiming for in this whole game. As you scale the steps on the other side of the metro tunnels, you'll soon be greeted by two very familiar sights, a couple of super mutants and some Brotherhood of Steel soldiers. Now if you've been following so far, you might be a bit confused by why either of these things are here, but hold on, we'll get to that later. The Brotherhood escort you to the GNR Plaza, where you meet with
Bow wow,
who may or may not send you on some errands, but will ultimately point you in the direction of Rivet City to the far south. It's around this point in the game where you start to realise that all these games are the same thing. You go from place to place looking for information so that you can find a thing before, spoilers, the second half where a big bad shows up for you to defeat. It could be argued that this is important to the formula of the series, but since no one ever tries to make a fucking Fallout game that's not structured in this way, then how will we ever know? Rivet City is another example of a brilliantly designed location with a lot of character, but without any real thought put into its authenticity. Which is fine, I guess. We don't all desire the same things. You like blondes, your dad likes redheads, I like cartoon characters. Different strokes for different blokes. Rivet City is the largest settlement in the game and is home to a whole host of characters, and even its own security force led by Captain Let's Make a Whole Game About This side quest. In Rivet City you meet a woman called Dr. Lee, who is a friend of your father and tells you that he went off to the Jefferson Memorial where this thing called Project Purity was being worked on, which is this large-scale water purifier that your father and Dr. Lee were working on, and is incredibly important to the main plot of the game. After dealing with some, as of yet unexplained, super mutants inside Project Purity, you find a note from your father that tells you he's gone to Vault 112 in search of a Dr. Braun. Vault 112 is way the fuck over here, by the way. Let's walk and talk. Fallout 3's world space is one of the most enjoyable to explore in the whole series. Bethesda's particular talent at environmental storytelling and world building on a visual level make everywhere you wander feel interesting and satisfying to investigate, like dipping your bare feet into warm baked beans. The world is dense enough to remain entertaining but sparse enough to not feel crowded, which is a big problem with Fallout 4. And overall, the side locations and experiences on offer are endlessly entertaining on at least some base level. Unlike Skyrim. In regards to the look of the world and the game, people take issue with the green filter, and yes, it can be a little vomity at times, but as far as getting across the poisonous and dead feeling that Bethesda were going for here, it is effective, you can't argue that. Also, this game is on the Gamebryo engine, and quite frankly anything that covers up some of the visual self-harm on display is welcome. Vault 112 was the final vault to be constructed, and contained a number of virtual reality simulator podatrons that the occupants were told were to let them live in a virtual utopia. Instead, they've been trapped in an eternal hell with Dr. Braun keeping them in the simulation so that he can play sick, twisted games with them. You enter the simulation and try to help your dad escape it. You can do so by either doing a series of horrible things for Dr. Braun, or by hopping a fence and inputting the "can we skip this part" code, because quite frankly after your 20th playthrough it becomes a little boring. Anyways, your dad is pretty apathetic about your sudden arrival back into his life, and he says you've got to go back to working on the purifier, so it's a long walk back or a fast travel and a quick wait before you do some mundane nonsense inside of Project Purity, like install some fucking fuses. All of this is clearly to move you towards a trigger zone where the Enclave will suddenly appear, because Bethesda really needed all of the Fallout related things to be in this game. Anyways, they kill your dad and it's so sad. You run away through some convenient escape tunnels into the arms of the Brotherhood of Steel. This particular chapter of the Brotherhood could very well be described as being Brotherhood in name only. Their presence in the Capital Wasteland is due to them being sent to recover tech and all that classic Brotherhood shit from the other side of the country. But at some point during all of that, their elder, Lyons, after seeing the situation in the Capital Wasteland, decided to abandon much of the Brotherhood's doctrine and dedicate his chapter to helping the people of the Wasteland. This kind of left this chapter with being cast out by the big boys back home, and as such they are kind of their own thing. The closest thing to a group that fills the typical Brotherhood role in this game are the Outcasts, who, even though they're called the Outcasts, are the ones who still follow the Brotherhood's doctrine. So you could kind of think of them as the Brotherhood and the Brotherhood as the Outcasts. You need to find a GECK to get the purifier working. A GECK is that miraculous device that can be used to jumpstart entire civilizations, and you're going to use it to get your Brita water filter working. Anyways, the Brotherhood scientist man is like, yo, get your ass to Vault 87 for one home slice. To get to Vault 87 you need to travel through a town in a cave inhabited exclusively by children that has been there for 200 years. Please try not to think too much about the logistics of that situation. 87 is the home of and the source of the Capital Wasteland super mutant population. The experiment was to test the fourth evolutionary virus on the Vault's inhabitants. I'm not going to say I'm thrilled about that as an explanation considering the way that FEV is presented in Fallout 1, but there have been far worse explanations for super mutants in the series since, so I can't be too mad. After you get the GECK, Ying comes at your ass,
flashbang through the door,
and you're dragged off and captured by the Enclave where, after some nonsense, you get to chatting with the President of the United States. Yes, another one. who this time is a Zax computer, which is a form of artificial intelligence, a thing that is far more common in this series than it likes to act like it is. Basically, Bossman wants you to insert a modified FEV virus into the purifier to kill all the mutants, but this will also basically kill everybody else. It's basic supervillain shit and only really serves to give you a weak choice if you're playing an evil character. Back at the Citadel, you walk up to Elder Lions like, ah shit, the Enclave have the Gek! So to prove that war never changes, you assault the Purifier with help from Ex Machina Prime, and shoot the bad guy in the face. There's been some sort of tampering with the Purifier, and it has to be turned on to stop it from going all Nagasaki. So either you send one of your chumps in, or it's time for you to be the hero, and step into the Purifier and turn it on. As you collapse to the ground, you watch the water clear around the statue of Obama, and the screen fades to black. Fallout 3 is one of those gaming experiences that I hold so very dearly to my heart. It represents my first taste of a series that would later come to devour thousands of hours of my time, and it fundamentally changed what I desired from gaming from that point onwards. This is a game with a pretty cliche main quest, pretty shitty combat, and a fantastically built world that makes up for it all. To put it another way, it's a Bethesda game. The most Bethesda-y Bethesda game that has ever been made. Like it or not, the Fallout series would have likely died if not for this game. The situation at Interplay was not great. So thank you, Fallout 3, for being a game that dragged Fallout into the mainstream, and ensured that, just like Star Wars, we'll never be free of it. I give it a...
And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
out of 10.